Go.
Yeah.
Oh, are we live? I'm not sure if anyone's come into the group chat yet, but yeah, it looks like we're good. If anyone watching would be able to just let me know that you can hear the audio, that would be awesome. But yeah, other than that, I think we're good. So yeah, I'm honored today to be joined by Howdie Mickoski here. Yeah, I've been listening to you for a long time, man. So thank you again for coming on.
Hey, it's great to be here. And like I say, I bumped into your stuff about a month ago. You did one on soul traps that I thought was a really good presentation. You also did some stuff on what's going on in Eastern Europe. I thought that was also really good presentations and overviews. And so, yeah, I thought we should have a conversation because it's, you're presenting good material. So yeah.
Yeah, it was cool you reached out. I mean, I remember I had like a guest over a few months ago and we were playing chess and I like put on one of your videos in the background and we were just like listening to you while playing chess. And then you reach out to me and like, oh, hell yeah, it's Howdy. Okay. So yeah, let me just give a brief introduction for those who don't know who Howdie Mickoski is. He is the author of 4 fantastic books, including one that I just recently read that we'll be talking about today and going over. He's a metaphysical researcher and philosopher. He's also been interviewed by popular content creators like Sam Tripoli and Owen Benjamin. I remember Owen Benjamin talking about Howard at one point too, about his work on the expositions or the World Fair. But today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about like reincarnation and the idea behind that, and the whole Gnostic idea of like the possibility of soul traps. He does this deep dive of this subject in his new book, and he gives an overview of Plato's cave, and how he actually offers a critique of Plato's cave in his new book. Yeah, so it's a very large subject, so it's hard to even know where to begin. But like, what is like the base level like of your belief system when it comes to this metaphor of Plato's cave and the reincarnation soul trap? Give us just a basic overview of like your book.
Yeah. My views, of course, have changed over the last 25 years. I started this journey out of a pretty severe depression and a lot of life difficulties 25 years ago. Moved into the study of ancient Egypt and the study of alchemy and hermeticism. And I was lucky enough to meet some native medicine men then and train with them on the reserves. And
Sorry.
there was a Korean monk who was really helpful, some Qigong teachers from China. And I was building up this kind of a knowledge of the world, but my focus at that time was, what is reality? How do I know if reality is real or not? So I went through about 8 or 9 years of studying the reality of the world and found out it's not. And then I got arrogant. I thought I was pretty smart. I had a death experience in 2005 when I fell in a river near a waterfall. And that revealed, oh yeah, I'm not real either. The whole thing is a type of simulation. And I went through a good 10 years of confusion and difficulty from all that. Through all that time, there had been this recognition that reality's not just is not real, that it's very controlled. We're very manipulated, but I too was being manipulated. And it wasn't until after I wrote the Fairs book and a couple of years ago when I decided to finally go back to this material, which was, what is reality? Why is it created? Why are we here? And if I had to put it into a nutshell, it seems like we are in a false reality that has been created, but certainly not for our benefit, and certainly not by any kind of loving creator. It's, that's a whole story we can get into, what is or isn't all of these different creators. And it seems like we've been tricked into this realm one way or another. We've been tricked in, and now we're used as sort of like an energy source or a power source to run the system itself, which makes sense. If you think of the universe, Plato's cave, which is massive. It's not just the material realm, it's the etheric, it's the astral, it's everything, and it's maybe multiple realms within the realms. That would be a lot of power if that was a computer system. It would make sense if you could use the beings in your system to create the power for the system itself. That's just ingenious. And I think that's what we're doing here, that there's this giant thing running along, and every time we die, the system eats off what we have left, recycles us back in, known as reincarnation, puts us back into a new form, a new body, so that we can keep this process going again. And I mean, we can talk about these things now, share these ideas of like the memory wipe. Like, where are you with your own study of the memory wipe, which most of your people following this will know? In my eyes, that's a big key to indicate that we're not in any kind of school or place of learning. We're in some kind of trap, because if you don't remember your past lives, you're already you you know, that's a huge part of learning. Learning is seeing what you've done, making note of it, making changes if needed, and going forward. If you don't remember anything, you're operating blind. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I like to tackle this subject using like the scientific method instead of it being like a religious thing or even a spiritual thing. If we're able to just look at the data of like the amount of children that have been interviewed that remember their past lives, and then they actually meet the people that they claim to know in order to verify their experience. Not only that, but the countless NDE experiences of people going through the white tunnel of light and being memory wiped. I just think that the data speaks for itself when it comes to reincarnation being a real thing. So there's a lot of validity to this idea. So then we can ask the next question, now that we can, kind of comfortably assume reincarnation is real. Like, what is the purpose of our reincarnations if we're not remembering anything that happened to us in previous lives? And that's why it kind of goes against the whole New Age belief that, we're here to learn lessons and to grow. But how is that possible if we can't recall the lessons that we've been learning? It just doesn't seem very efficient. So I think it's just a very reasonable question to ask.
Yeah, it's two of my favorite quotations from this whole thing. One is from Richard Rose, which is, why would an omnipotent being create a bunch of ignorant people and then torture them to make them better? Standpoint of why this isn't a school. And then there's another one from a Greek writer, Angeliki Agonostou, and hers was, in other words, souls start off as pure spiritual entities and are incarnated to matter. Why? To return home where they started from, pure again, and having gained what? Virtual life experiences useless to the spiritual plane. And so I think that's something that we also really have to get this grasp on, is we're presented, the soul or our essence is pure, it's perfect, it's all knowing, it's wonderful, but we have to send you constantly into this realm of suffering for you to learn. Well, you're already telling us that we're pure and we already kind of like know everything, and we're in a timeless realm. Why do we need to come in here and suffer to learn? That's the craziest thought possible.
So I have one possible explanation for it, for us not remembering things. When you think of the idea that there are actually different sizes of infinity, like if you line up all odd numbers compared to all whole numbers, the infinity of whole numbers is larger than the odd numbers. So like maybe there's some aspects of us, like, we're already perfect, sure, but maybe we can refine ourselves even further through like this forged process of suffering in a material realm. That you kind of follow?
Yeah, I
what
know
I'm
the
saying
thought
there?
behind it, but again, once you start looking into what the Gnostics and the Cathars have to say, that in their view, right, this is not a place of a loving creator who's here to care for us and a place to help us grow and learn and will bring us back to a loving place, that this was created by an evil being, a demiurge, Rex Mundi, whatever you want to call it. And therefore everything in the material world, everything in a sense is evil, the whole thing, including a physical. So soon, and not just as you take a physical body, as soon as you take an astral body or an etheric body, you're already, you might say, in a sense, in sin, right? You're already kind of and so you're already, once you're in here, the spark is already impure. And I know you're going to ask about the Cathars, but for them that was such a huge element, because one of the things that got them in so much trouble with the Church of Rome was their assertion that the Jesus story, as it's told, could not be true, because if Jesus was to come in and if Christ was to come in and take a physical form, that he would right away he would be sin. He would automatically be evil, like all the rest of us, in a sense, and would have to, in a sense, redeem himself, which would be destroys the whole story. But if he came in as a hologram, as simply, therefore, couldn't be born, couldn't be die, was just a piece of information that was being shared, then they could fully understand it, and they said the story could make sense. So your concept there, I think, would falter, because the part that is pure is not the part that takes form. The part that is pure seems to be encased in the rest of the form. So there's no point to make the make the make the video game character perfect for the soul to get any more perfect. You know what I mean? Like once you get the separation of the thing in the video game and the thing outside the video game, nothing inside the video game will actually
Yeah, they're two separate
improve the thing
things.
really
You're saying
outside.
they're
Yeah.
completely separate.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah. And it's just somehow the person playing the game has been sucked, as part of has been sucked in the computer, and we're kind of like identified now with the game itself, and not even realizing like, hey, the real us is out there, maybe not doing much. It's waiting for that part to come back. It's just kind of sitting there. We're in the game, not much is really happening, nothing is really going on, and we're in this weird limbo kind of place, which is how life sometimes feels for me, that like stuff is going on, but it's not really going on. There's like nothing's really happening. It's just stuff. And it's me trying to add meaning to just stuff.
Yeah. You quickly mentioned the Cathars, who I think are a very interesting group of people to study. And would you be able to give a brief overview of who the Cathars were? Because you touched about them in the book. And in your book, you actually said that the Divine Comedy of Dante's Inferno could have possibly been a Gnostic Cathar text. Would you be able to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I will. I thought first, for everybody who is watching, in case you don't know, we're right now in the 60th anniversary of JFK's assassination. And literally, like, that was in your time a few hours ago. And it's one of from our historical time, it's one of the biggest changes of everything that happened. I mean, literally, the whole world, the whole reality changed from that experience. So I'm just, in case some of you have forgotten, I'm just marking the energy of today. And there's some truth to, I mean, whatever happened to the Cathars, that was a pretty marking time as well. So when it comes to Dante, I can't say much yet about Dante's Divine Comedy because I just started to read it. So it's more of an assertion I had from looking into a couple of elements of it that maybe it is, but it's a massive text. It's like 1,000 pages, and it's going to take me a while to even do my first read through of it to find out if my theory is correct or not. So I can't say too much yet about Dante. But Cathars, so for a simple overview, and then we can take this wherever you want to take it. They're a type of Gnostic, certainly dualistic group that was living in southern France. No one's really sure where they came from. No one's really sure when they got there. And no one even is for sure what to know about them, because all of their books were destroyed in the Inquisition, and most of what's written about them is written by the Church of Rome, who are the ones who eventually exterminated them, starting in 1209 in the first crusade and Inquisition against their own people. They considered themselves to be real Christians or true Christians. They felt that they followed the parts of the New Testament that they felt were accurate and correct, and eliminated the other stuff that they felt was incorrect and corrupt. And they said that they followed those completely. They were, dualistic. They were non-separative, so women were equal to men in the order. In fact, the priesthood had to have an equal man and female. There was known as a perfecti, and they had to be man and woman. So one it wasn't just one running; they had to be together in a sort of a blend of the masculine, feminine energy. Their number one driving philosophy was that this realm was a trap for the soul, and you were going to be reincarnated in here over and over again until you escaped. And as such, the only value to your life in this world was to understand that cycle and end it. So everything else took absolutely second meaning. So they became pacifist in many cases. Many of them were vegetarian. They discouraged against the sex for the point of having more children, because they said as soon as you have a child, you're making another place where another soul can be trapped into this realm, and there's already enough trapped souls. We need to get the ones out, not bring more in. So for many of these reasons, they were considered dangerous to the Church in Rome, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would a bunch of vegetarian pacifists be dangerous to the Church of Rome? Well, at the exact same time this is going on, we've got the rise of the Knights Templar. It's also in southern France. We've got the rise of the stories of the Holy Grail, the original stories came out of northern France, but they were very much related to seemingly the Cathars in this group in southern France. We've got the troubadours moving around, giving their stories of poetic and a new type of love in the poetry. So we've got all of these elements all mingling in southern France. And it made me start to ask questions, not just because of they're seeing it as a reincarnation trap, but more like, okay, why are all these key groups in southern France? What could be the purpose behind it? And obviously, because the Catholic Church got rid of both of them, they got rid of the Cathars and the Knights Templar, and realistically, anybody else down there they didn't like. So the question is really why? Why was it so important for the Church of Rome to eliminate these groups of people? And yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that the story of like the Garden of Eden could have been possibly a Gnostic text too? Like maybe the God in the garden was like supposed to represent the demiurge?
Yes, that I think we can say that for sure. Obviously, that story can be interpreted like 100 different ways. It's like the positive thing about that story and the negative thing about the story. It's there's so many veils of opening from the standpoint of symbolism. It's hard to know what's going on. I think the only thing we know for sure, and that's something that the Cathars and the Gnostics were all very clear about, that what's being called is they believe that there was a, I don't want to call it a good God, that's not the right word, but like a totality, an absolute, a complete a complete and not even a being, right? A complete experience, which they called a combination of father and mother, which was outside of all of this. And this particular thing we know of as Plato's cave or the Matrix, that was made by this demiurge. And to them, the Old Testament is the story really of the demiurge. So it is a story of the creator, but not the thing that we truly should be connected to, not the thing that we would consider our home. I don't think anybody really feels this is home. I mean, everybody knows there's something wrong with this place. Depending on where we're at, everybody feels something's not right here. It's not home. So the Garden of Eden story, we know that's the demiurge. And here comes the question that we can discuss about that Garden of Eden story. And that is, of course, the tree and the serpent. So if the demiurge, or we'll just say God, whoever the creator is, the creator, if the creator makes the Garden of Eden, okay, he's made these humans, and he's made everything there, but makes one thing and tells them, don't go there. Which, if we all know Darren Brown, as soon as you give anyone a command, don't do something, of course, the first thing they're going to do is do it. That's almost guaranteed. So if the creator really didn't want them to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge, he either wouldn't have made it, or after making it said, oh, this was a mistake. I'm all powerful. I can remove it. But the fact that it was made and it was left there indicates that that was what was wanted to happen. The demiurge wanted the two humans to eat from it, but he couldn't make them eat it. This is also a very important part of the story. They had to choose to do it themselves. And I think that's a really important part of the whole reincarnation cycle, reincarnation trap, the thing that we find in that Star Trek Voyager episode of Coda, that we can't be forced to go into the white light, or we can't be forced to reincarnate, or we can't be forced into a lot of our soul contracts. We are the ones who have to agree to it. We are the ones who, in one level, and that's why there's so much, it's all tricks and deception. And you can kind of say it's all tricks and deception. So now I'll finish this and then I'll shut up. You can talk. Is when we get to the serpent, because depending on who you ask, some will say the serpent is wisdom, right? And the serpent is showing this to Adam and Eve, so that the serpent, like a Kundalini serpent, that is rising their energy, and so it can see the totality. You can also then see it as the serpent being a manifestation of the demiurge in form to finish the deception and the trick to get Adam and Eve to do the thing that he wants them to do. So you've got both avenues, which very well could be true. And yeah, where are you standing with the story?
Yeah, no, I like that you said that. I mean, I have a viewer here in the chat who asked the question, where is the source of the energy coming from? That's from Salvation by Grace. He's been a great viewer for a long time. And I think that sort of answers this question, that there's a good God and the demiurge, and they're different. The good God exists in what the Gnostics would say the pleroma, outside of this material world that we live in. And I think it's important to remember, like, if you're praying or connecting to God, I always make sure to make that distinction. I don't just simply think like, oh, God. I'm thinking like the good God of like the pleroma outside of this material world. So I think that's an important thing to think about when looking at that story.
Yeah. And if you think about even when we've learned when like we stub our toe, you know, oh God, or how many times people have been sort of manipulated to make this part of their standard terminology and day-to-day usage. And if that being is representing what we see in the Old Testament, then it's representing the demiurge. That means every time we make that comment, we are potentially giving energy back to the demiurge. For whatever strange reason, it's been something that has been, what's the word I'm looking for? Placed psychologically into people's minds that when they're at a height of sexual pleasure, that's a word they should utter. So again, it's like, well, when you're doing that, where's that energy going? Why would you be sending energy in the sexual experience there? Why wouldn't you be saying the name of your partner, the person you are with? And if energy is going anywhere, it should go to them. So yeah, what Brett just said there is this idea. Trying to understand that as soon as there's anything outside of yourself, there's an energy connection outside of yourself. And first of all, if you don't know what it is, well, you don't know where that energy is going. And there's a high likelihood that that energy is going to get lost, as opposed if at least if you have a guaranteed, I know where I'm directing that energy to, you have a much better chance of controlling it and at least having it used by something you hope to have it used for.
Yeah. I think that it's important to think about these concepts. And another important thing I think to learn is astral projection. Because after we die, it's possible that we're going to be facing a lot of deception, and we need to be able to become lucid once that event occurs. So have you practiced astral projection at all? Have you had a success with that? And you think that would help hold our lucidity in that event?
Oh, for sure. I would suggest it. Yeah. Have you ever, by the chance, have you ever seen yourself out from outside your body as your body? Have you had that experience yet?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. So I've had that a few times without attempting astral projection. This was way back when I was a teenager, but I've had that a couple of times where I was in obviously a non-physical form and saw my physical body. And it is an experience that at the time you kind of just blow past it. You kind of just you try to ignore it because it's so disorienting to realize what just happened. And it kind of takes almost 8 to 10 years to kind of, for me at least, to start remembering that experience and actually, wait a minute. I want to look into this. Really beginning to ask questions about it. And it happened again when I was in the Great Pyramid, again, without any effort on my part. I was split in two. So there was, and in that case, it was really strange because as I was entering the Great Pyramid, as I was crawling into the King's Chamber, I was watching, myself move, not myself, but I was watching through my eyes as I was going into the King's Chamber. But I was also at the same moment standing in the King's Chamber, watching myself crawl in and enter. I was in both places at the same time and seeing from two different sets of eyes at the same time. So I was literally in two places at once.
Wow.
So all those Castaneda stories of the double were very clear. And and that was my first trip. That was my first entrance into the Great Pyramid of the whatever 15 or 20 times I've been in. And it's like I was given the great gift, right there in the experience, one of the great pieces. And it took me another, like I say, 10 years to really start recognizing, holy cow, I've been looking for secrets and whatever wonders of the pyramid. And where's the information? I think that's it. There it is. So over the course of my life, I have done some lucid dreaming. I have done some out of body experience, not as much as I maybe should have. I've done a lot of also what would be called shamanic dreaming or dream journeying, where you're trying to move into other realms of existence. But of course, I'm slowing down on that a bit now because I'm not sure exactly what level of existence I'm going to and who for sure I'm interacting with. But my recommendation would be, yeah, like you're saying, this would be a valuable thing to gain some experience of whether it's lucid dreaming or astral traveling, because we need to get used to being conscious without a body, because that's going to for sure be the after death experience we're going to have. We won't have everyone talks about, I'm so free. I have no physical body anymore. It's so wonderful. And it's usually, that's one of the first traps. They feel so good because all of the elements and the heaviness of the body is gone. But if you're not ready for that, not only is it confusing, you're going to easily be tricked because you feel so good. And the more experience you have, I think, being used to in some way having some consciousness without a body, you're going to be able to recognize it quicker. It's like, okay, after death, like an astral experience. Okay, focus what I'm doing here. Don't get trapped, don't get caught, be clear and aware. And to me, that's one of the most important pieces we can begin to prepare ourselves for these states, is this recognition of staying clear, staying aware, not being in a place where we can be easily manipulated, or at least we can be at a place where we can say, stop, I'm not doing any of this. I'm not following any of this. I'm just going to be still and I'm going to think about it. I'm going to take my time. So that's also a really important part to just practice in your own, even simply in your own life. You know, someone calls you up, says, hey, you want to come to my party on Saturday? It's a good practice to just say, let me just look over some things in my schedule. Let me get back to you in a couple hours. Click. Give yourself some time to just get used to, give me some space. Let me contemplate. Let me really think it over. And then whatever your answer is going to be, then live up to the answer, right? I mean, then live your answer fully, but at least know whenever you make an answer, whenever you say yes to something, you know what you're saying yes to.
Right. And I think a big thing after death is going to be avoiding temptation. Just like down here on earth, like as above, so below, we're going to be tempted to go into this like beautiful white light. Yep. But no, we got to take a step back and be like, all right, let's question this first. Is this really the avenue I want to go down? And you also mentioned Carlos Castaneda, who I wanted to get into really bad with you too. I've been reading a little bit the book Active Side of Infinity, where he talks about, and you know, this book is about Don Juan, a shaman that Castaneda tutored under. And Don Juan was telling him that there are parasitic entities in this world. And what they feed off of is something called our glowing coat of awareness. And there's certain, you know, tricks he tells us that we can learn to kind of get all these negative energy and forces away from us in life, and maybe like do a thought experiment. Like, I'm going to imagine my energy being unpalatable to like these negative energies, like if they want to feast off us, like make it sour, make it disgusting for them. Do you feel like maybe that's like a helpful thing to do?
Certainly the story of the idea of the glowing coat of awareness is a very interesting metaphor, because one thing about Castaneda is he says things and he makes up words for things without telling you really what it is. So it's like, it's sneaky, but not sneaky at the same time. And of course, we know pretty much for sure that he's writing a story, right? He's writing like a novel, but he's producing tremendous amounts of information that have come from somewhere, because the novels are so clear about what he's writing about. So dealing with the glowing coat of awareness is dealing with the parasitic mind, as dealing with this, what he calls foreign installation, or these alien beings who gave us a mind that's not ours. The mind we use daily is not our normal mind. So I think it really starts there. The number one thing to start with is to recognize we've got this like AI computer system in our head that is, or not our head, like in our energy field, that is designed to put us into negative energy situations where we can be eaten, or the glowing coat of awareness can be eaten. So step one is to follow the practices. In this case, if you're following Castaneda stuff, which is in all the books before that, which would be things that the recapitulation and the not doing and the dreaming and the various, you know, the stalking exercises, in order to make the mind, the foreign installation, be no longer as strong as it used to be. To start weakening it. You can't get rid of it immediately, but you weaken it. You make it that it doesn't operate at its highest level yet. And eventually, I think for him, he talked about you flood it with inner silence, I think is the way he's described it. So, but you can't kind of flood it with inner silence, you might say, until you've really come to understand it. I can say in my case, that's where the recapitulation, my first one took me 4.5 years to do. And then all the not doing exercises that came with it. I mean, I did some unbelievably crazy not doings in the course of my life to, at the same point, push the mind into places that's the whole idea of not doing. You're pushing it into places it doesn't like. It has certain routines, certain ways of doing things, certain belief structures. And when you force it by acting differently into other areas, the mind starts to weaken. It doesn't, it rebels, it gets very upset. And as it gets upset, you can start to see how it operates. And the more you start to see how it operates, the more you can, in a sense, start shutting it down. So I think that would be the number one method, even though he doesn't really talk about an active side of infinity. You have to kind of bring the stuff from the early books and apply it to what he's talking about, because all this stuff about the what he calls the flyer, that's his last book. He doesn't write anything about it until the final of his books, almost like he knows he's dying, so he's finally going to share it. Although I heard he shared some of it in lectures that he did in Mexico City a number of years before that, but in print it never appeared until this last book. But I think you apply kind of like a Stanley Kubrick movie. You can't really watch Eyes Wide Shut and understand it if you don't apply all the Stanley Kubrick movies before it and sort of drop it into Eyes Wide Shut to understand what's going on.
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing about the parasitic foreign installation too. Like I read a science article recently, that we don't just think with our brains, we think with like our hearts too. Like we can store like memories in different parts of our organs, not just in our fleshy brain. So maybe this foreign installation is making us focus on thinking with our egoic mind, when in reality, human beings, we are supposed to utilize our heart more in order to make our day-to-day decisions. Because how else do you like figure out the contradiction of man, the brilliant engineer, and then the contradiction of man doing foolish things and going to war with other people and being greedy and bloodthirsty? Like it doesn't make any sense, really. And that's something Castaneda talked about.
Yeah, it totally makes sense when you realize that something else is running our show. But it's very difficult to say, well, we just start living from our heart. Problem is, normally what people think that means is, well, I'm going to start living from my feelings. Well, the feelings are another part of the foreign installation. They're not really our true feelings either. So it's like the level of tricks and the level of deception in this is so great. And that's why you can't just will a change. You actually have to, in a sense, I think, exercise the change. You actually have to, it's interesting, exercise, the same word as taking out a demon, as doing practices, it's the same word. So by doing the practices, you start to exercise the demon at the same time. So having whatever those practices that will be, that is right for the person to do, that has to be part of the journey. You can't intellectually think your way into knowing. You have to do and action your way into it.
Yeah. So one other thing I wanted to bring up with you today is I noticed you released a new video on a Dark City today on YouTube. And I always thought that movie was a good metaphor for some Gnostic ideas. And I have a video on the same movie as well.
Yeah.
And there's this one like big question I have with this movie. The main character, John Murdoch, he was able to do something called tuning, which really like scared the strangers, the antagonists of the film. And he was able to like fight back once he learned how to tune. What do you think that represented in that movie to you?
I'll ask you first, what do you think tuning is? If you had to make, what's your opinion of it?
Well, the way I see it is like everything is energy, and energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be converted. So when human beings, we encounter negative energy in our lives, most of us, we just like let it consume us. And then we let the dark forces here just like kind of feast off the negativity. But it's truly powerful to be able to convert that into something positive and then use that energy as a catalyst to make you even greater. Because in that standpoint, your depression is a good thing, because it's giving it like a broken heart gives you so much motivation, so much energy if you channel it in a positive way. And I think that whatever controls this world doesn't want us to know how to channel that.
Yeah, that's good. That's why I'm always curious how people view all this stuff, because it's hard to know what tuning really is. It takes me along the lines of, again, Richard Rose and his talks about betweenness. Rose was very clear about the powers that we have to manifest in this reality, that we can literally manifest just about anything we want. But the trick was, we can move mountains, but we have to have mountains that agree to be moved. So it's this bizarre interplay. When we are trying to force our will on the material world around us, we're going to have problems, because we're not taking the material world into consideration. It's much easier for something to happen. Like, I don't go out and pick a flower from nature. I don't go out and take a rock from nature unless I've learned from the natives I've been with to sit with it for a while and, in a sense, communicate, talk to it, and find out first, what does the flower want? I mean, maybe the flower wants to stay there in nature. That's what it really wants to be. So I shouldn't be imposing my own egoic structure on the flower. If the flower wants to be in nature, great. If the flower wants to come back with me, then that's all, not just my choice of I'd like to have this flower, it's the flower's choice of I'd like to go with you. It's you. And as soon as you have this symbiotic relationship of what does the external want and matching it to what the internal wants, that's where the manifestation comes. So to me, if I'm using the word tuning as a metaphor, it's something like that. It's tuning, a combination of the external and the internal become the same. Just like you're moving on a radio dial to zoom into AM 1200, you're doing kind of the same thing. So bizarrely, it's the opposite. We're taught we need to know what we want, and we're going to force that on the run reality, and we're going to make our wishes come true. If we do the opposite, if we figure out what does reality want, what does the dream actually want, and if we decide I'm going to want that partially too, manifesting becomes really easy then, because you're not fighting reality. So you have to kind of think, no, a combination of what do I want? That's important. What does the dream want? And you find this middle ground. So somewhere this is going on, and somewhere within the dark city reality, the dark city reality itself wanted the strangers gone. So Murdoch was able to tune into it, make it happen. But then we get to the whole ending of the movie, which I know you've read my book too, and you've done yourself, is did John Murdoch really accomplish anything? Right? Even though he got rid of the strangers, even though he brought light to the city, even though he got a nice water there, he made Shell Beach, no one else in the city knows anything about what's going on. Nobody still knows where they came from. Nobody still knows what their home is. They're still in Dark City and they don't know what's going on. Like, how much did John Murdoch, other than make things a little nicer for a while, how much did he really accomplish? And that's, I think, the twist part of Dark City is, of course, people see it in this happy realm, but I mean, he's now together with the wife that we knew from the previous incarnations there, and she doesn't remember him, doesn't know who she is. In fact, now she's a completely different personality. So what did he gain, really? It's a very powerful thing to end that movie with as a question for people. It seems like he gained a lot, but did he?
Right. And I think this is one thing that you've said before along the lines of when you're analyzing Plato's cave, the utility isn't looking and studying the cave. The utility is in learning how to escape from the cave, that a lot of people really don't focus on when they really should. And like the cave is way bigger than we think. Like, it's not just our material world. It's probably like the astral world. It's probably the entire holographic universe. And that's why when I watched Dark City, notice that it started in a hotel. And I really feel like the hotel just represented like the material world. And then him leaving the hotel was him dying. And then him dealing with the archons after death is what it really symbolically like represented from that standpoint. Like, remember like the Hotel California song by, I think it's the Eagles. Like, that song is definitely about like the reincarnation soul trap here on Earth.
It's as perfect a song as you could get. Yeah, Wayne Bush over on his site, trickedbythelight.com, he has a complete detailed description of it. And there's only like one or two lines in the whole breakdown that he does that I would think has a different like interpretation. He did a great interpretation on it. The other thing I just thought about when you're talking about the movie starts in a hotel, well, that indicates that he's a guest. Right? When you're in a hotel, you're not really from there, you're traveling. So it's an indication that Murdoch, technically, like everybody we're going to see in Dark City, we find out they're not from there, they're from somewhere else. So I never thought of that until you just mentioned that right now, the idea that it starts in a hotel.
Yeah. And there's another thing that you said before too, where it like you talked about the Matrix itself, and the Matrix is running just fine. It's doing exactly what it's meant to do with making us like, you know, feel these certain ways and taking advantage of us. So there's people out there that want to fix the machine, but you can't fix it. It's not broken, you know? So like, what advice would you give for people trying to fix the machine?
Yeah, I mean, that's a combination of a few things, right? Once a person starts to, I don't like to use the word wake up, that's a bad word, start having realizations about this place and who they are and what this place is, and realize there's something wrong with the world. It's something wrong on various levels. The more you see, the bigger it gets. Of course, the last 2 or 3 years, more and more people are seeing more and more stuff is wrong with reality. But as long as someone thinks that this is made by a loving God and it's supposed to be loving and perfect, it's supposed to be wonderful, then the initial impetus is, well, God needs my help to fix it then. it's supposed to be a particular way and it's not. So there's something wrong with it. And the natural tendency of a human, when we find something wrong, we try to fix it. That's like a natural implanted thing. The switch starts to come when if we start to say, okay, but if that's not what this realm is, if this realm really is a trap and it's designed, I call it a suffering pit of hell. If it's designed to be a suffering pit of hell, and that's really what it is, with small breaks of niceness in between, and in a sense set up like an AI run video game, can a character in a video game change the game? No, of course not. The game is going to be the game. Now, of course, I'm not saying that certain people can, and not certain people, anybody could, you might say, learn the code. And that's kind of what shamans do. That's kind of what Pythagoras did. That's what all these great people in the past, they kind of learned how to access the code of reality and could then, you might say, change the code. Because if you knew the code of the game, you could uncode certain things and the game would be different. Mm-hmm. But to uncode the whole game, that's a massive undertaking. I mean, you could theoretically, I guess, try to get into the hard drive and shut the thing down. I mean, I think that's the thing, shut down the simulation. And I think that's a lot of why are all these minions running the show? Why are they doing what they do in governments and organizations? And what are these archons doing? I think a big part of what their design is, they have to keep the simulation running. If the simulation gets to the point where it powers down or it gets bugged out and ends, they end too, because we are from outside of the game. So if the game ends, well, we would have to return to our natural state. There'd be nothing keeping us anymore. But they are a part of the game. They're not from outside of it. So for them, when the game ends, they end. So there's just a natural tendency that they have to do whatever they can to keep the game going. And I think if you see these beings and these people that way, that's really what their motivation is. They know if the simulation ends, they end. So the problem, it becomes a question of energy. So if we're dealing with, we have a finite amount of energy at our disposal. I've seen so many people, and I've done it too. I went out, I thought I could fix the world too for a while. Mm-hmm. And you go out and you try to fix the world and nothing gets better. In fact, it tends to get worse. And all that happened is I got really tired and exhausted. That's not a good use of my energy. Instead, I started to notice over the number of years but the energy I put into myself and my environment and some people who are close to me and who I'm connected to, that energy can be changed in small pieces. So rather than looking to fix the world, we look to we transform some things that are in our small environment, while at the same time getting to understand this place in ourselves correctly. And of course, in my case, I've now decided 100%, I'm done with this reality. I'm leaving. I'm going home, and there's no way I'm coming back here. So a portion of my energy is going towards that purpose, which I think is good. But the key is have some sort of focus or pathway that a main part of your energy is going to for yourself selfishly. And then you have another bit of energy that's somehow for like your combined environment or the area, you might say, around you, or something that you can influence on a decent basis, and let the game just be the game it's going to be and not be dragged into it.
Yeah, one thing you've also said, you don't call them always the controllers. You think a more accurate term is influencers, because the people that have control over this world, it's never direct. It's always like whispering in your ear what to do. It's like hypnotic. We do everything basically to ourselves in this realm. That would explain their desperation.
It's controlling they're trying to influence perception. That's why I use the word. They're not necessarily controlling reality. They're just influencing how we perceive reality, and then how we perceive it will determine the action.
Right, because we're creator beings, and quantum physicists talk about how we most likely create the reality around us with, Schrodinger's cat, and if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around, does anyone hear it? Another thing I wanted to bring up with you too is in your book, you talked about a really interesting ayahuasca vision that you had about people were created actually by Mother
I know what
Nature.
You're talking about. No, and first of all, it's not. I don't use drugs in any way, shape, or form.
And never mind.
I don't recommend. I don't recommend drugs to be used at all. It was a vision that came from time with a shaman I know, and it was all through drumming and singing. But go ahead with your question. I just want to make sure everybody.
Okay, good. Yeah, thanks for clearing that up. Good. Yeah. And the vision was something about humanity was created by Mother Nature in order to help and save Mother Nature. And I thought it was at least a beautiful kind of metaphor, if you want to go into that.
Yeah, it was a nice metaphor, actually. It was, but I mean, there was darkness to the metaphor as well. Of course, as you read it, there's a dark part of it. It was very much in contrast. There's an entire chapter there. That's chapter 3. It's all about various, we'll call them, I don't want to call them creation myths, but creation ideas. I go through what the Gnostics have to say, what the Cathars say, what Robert Monroe says, what Castaneda has to say, just how this realm is created and generated. And just this particular vision I had, which was so different from the idea of we are from outside the realm and are brought into it, which is the standard way the Gnostics and everyone else describe it. We're not home, but we're brought from outside of here. This vision showed me an opposite. It's still we're not home, but we are built from nature itself. That the vision itself was saying that, again, it's just a vision, right? So it might be true, it might not be true for everyone out there. Was that it's nature that is originally trapped in this realm. So the demiurge's trap originally was just nature and animals, and we were not part of the original trap at all. We didn't exist. And nature didn't have the capabilities to exit the cave, to exit the matrix themselves. And so in the vision, they had like a meeting and built a new creature, which is us, who were built with certain capabilities, who would be able to get to the doorway of the matrix and not just leave for ourselves, but we were designed to take nature with us. And that's a really important, I think, piece of this. And I keep that in my mind all the time, is that I'm just not going to exit the cave myself. I want to take some trees, and I want to take some fish, and I want to take some birds, and I want to take some rocks. I want to take other things with me as I go from this vision. Um, and the vision itself at least explains why we don't fit in here. Why we're the only creature that needs clothing to survive, needs to have fires burning to stay warm, why we need buildings to live in, why we literally don't. The human creature is so frail and so useless, you might say, in the natural environment, that we need all of this extra stuff. So it would make sense that this could be an answer as to why we're like that. Nature said, you can use us, you can use the wood, you can use our animals, you can eat us, but you have to do your job and get us out of here. And somewhere along the way, these influencers, as we call them, realized that humans we're the danger point. Nature couldn't get out, but humans could get us out. So the whole focus began to be moving these archons into the realm and finding ways to mess up and distract and create conflict and difficulty and suffering for humans, so that we no longer follow what we were created to do. It's a very interesting concept, and I've still, of course, I can't verify it one way or another. I think about it quite often. When I'm in nature, I think about it quite a bit. And if those of you get the book, read that part of the chapter and see what you think about it. But it's a very, let's just put it this way, as a myth, it's a very connective myth. And I kind of believe some of it now, of course, because I had it. So I have a different connection than before I had the experience with trees, with rocks, with animals, with whatever, because I kind of feel like, oh yeah, I'm here because of you. You're the ones who created me, and you've created me with a job to do for all of us. So I better get to work and do my job.
Yeah, it sort of reminded me of Noah's Ark, like Noah had to save the animals from the upcoming like reset that was basically happening. And in your book, you talked about it's possible that humanity has gone through several resets. What
Yeah.
drew you to this conclusion? Do you think it's related to the Vedic cycles, like the Kali Yuga?
No, I can talk about that. My feeling was it's a combination of a number of things. One, I mean, I realized, or didn't realize, I came fairly clear that we're dealing with time loops for sure in our reality, that we are, so many things are looping, and not just time, but things within our life. So many pieces of our life are loops. And that makes sense. If you're running a giant computerized game, so to speak, a giant computerized world, that's a lot of coding. If you've got to have billions of possibilities going constantly, it's better to have a certain large number of possibilities, but just have them keep repeating, have certain things going over and over again. So for me, it's one of the key reasons for looking at history, because once you start realizing that history is just a repeating loop in some cases, Once you find one loop, you can start finding all the others. So that was the first part of it, was that recognition. It was from working with the World's Fairs in that book when I started to understand, this is before any of this 3-year garbage started in our world, that the word reset was constantly being used in the alternative community way back in 2018, 2019 to refer to another wipeout of humanity, similar to the way the flood is in the Bible, and that probably these expositions were the starting point of some after whatever that reset was. So once you start to see that this is happened many times, the question becomes, okay, yeah, does it refer to, is there some cycle? Is there just some automatic time frame where it's time, no matter what's happening, we're wiping this place out and starting fresh? That's possible. Or is it somehow controlled? There's a certain reason, there's a certain point, like, okay, now, and somebody flicks a switch and says, now is time to do the elimination. But it seems like there's these massive eliminations, and certainly we're in the next one. That's very clear. They're not using the people who are influencing at these big corporations and whatnot. They're not using the Great Reset as by accident. They mean very carefully what they say. And it has nothing to do with government. It has nothing to do with commerce. It has to do with energy. It has to do with a complete restructuring of how this entire realm energetically functions. And I think that's what's been happening many, many times. So if we look at, we look at, like you're talking about, yeah, the Vedas, who discuss these ideas of various yugas, who different cycles of time that are a constant wheel, and you go through a golden age and a less golden age and a less golden age, and then this Kali Yuga, which is awful, and then but the golden age comes back again. And to me, let's say it's true, okay, let's assume it's true. Well, that's the dumbest thing possible. Like, that in itself should indicate, well, oh, I'm in Kali Yuga, but soon it's going to be the golden age. Yeah, but so what? You're just going to keep reincarnating and you're going to be back in this garbage again. If anything, it should indicate the garbage will continue. And it's the same thing. Someone's punching you in the face repeatedly and then says, oh, wait a minute, it's golden age time. You get to have a day with no face punching. Oh, fantastic. I love this. And then the next day, oh, the face punching's back. Well, just be done with the face punching. That's kind of my thought process behind it. And again, it all may be true. It could be cyclical. It could be set up in some sort of system. But if there's some sort of system that's set up to have a period of increased suffering and increased difficulty on the whole planet, that's another reason for me to say, well, I'm getting the hell out of here. This is stupid.
Right. Yeah. I talk about the World Economic Forum on my channel and their plans for what they call the Great Reset. And it's spearheaded by Klaus Schwab. And you'll see pictures of him in like straight up wizard outfits with a bunch of alchemical symbols on it, like the sun. Yeah. And it's like, this dude is definitely an occultist. Just look at like the pins on his wizard suit. Like, so I could definitely see him being interested in this conversation and probably agreeing with what you have to say right now.
Oh, it's going to happen. There's this reality is finished. Like, I hate to say that, but the reality we've known is over. It's done. It's done, finished. The question is only going to be what comes next. And obviously the path that it's going to go one way or another is not something like you or I want to be a part of. So what is our other option then? And obviously it's not here. Now, a lot of people have been talking about that we're coming to a split point. The Hopis talked about this. Various ancient cultures talked. There was going to be a point where reality was going to literally split in two. There would be a completely material reality, which will be like a sinking into a deeper dimension, and there will be another split that will start actually getting out of the dimensions. And I think we're at that point. We're literally, if that's true, we're literally at that point. There's going to be this giant split. And I think all of this is happening right now because there's literally this doorway is opening, or it is open right now. And it's all meant to be a giant distraction. It's all meant to be a giant fear creating experience to miss the doorway, to miss the opening, to miss the pathway that's going to be there that we could take. I can now say from my own experience, I ran into a number of people a couple of years ago when I first started my channel who were sharing with me their difficulties and their challenges. They many of them quit their jobs and they were alone, and their family, basically disowned them, and they were stuck. And I shared a few ideas with them, and literally within 3 or 4 months, they did the spiritual work you would normally expect in 5 to 10 years. The growth and the speed that's available right now for people to work on themselves and transform is beyond anything I've ever seen. So, the fact that it's difficult now, and yes, the reset and the change and the mess is coming, guaranteed, but it also means it's only happening because there's a big doorway of transformation that if you want to take it and if you want to do the work, you can move at such unbelievable speed right now that I highly recommend following whatever pathway is right for you, because the opportunities for doing so are so immense.
Yeah, I was having that similar thought the other day because I was actually talking to one of my viewers. His name's Reefel. He's listening right now. He's an 18-year-old from Portugal, and he already is
Okay.
well aware of Gnosticism. He's well aware of like the idea of the Great Reset. And I'm like, this guy is 18, and me at 18, I was an idiot. Like I didn't know any of this stuff. And like
You're
Gen
still an
Z.
idiot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and Gen Z, they're called the Zoomers because they're like they seem to be like quick. Like Zoomers seem to like talk faster. They seem to pick up things quicker. In my experience, I
Mhm.
mean, a lot of them are pretty dumb, but I mean, there's a lot of them that are really shining through. And I think
Yeah.
they're just coming to terms with this knowledge faster than other generations. And the generation
Well,
after
it's
that,
because it's available now.
yeah,
Like
and the
even when I
internet,
was doing
right?
this work 25 years ago, a lot of stuff was hard to find. And when I went through my death experience, the whole understanding of integrating it and how that works, I mean, it just didn't exist. And I was stuck having to do it myself. When now that information is available. So there's also this possibility of it's there if people go looking for it. And someone like your friend, even though he's 18 years old, all you have to do is if you're because lots of teenagers are asked questions and they're serious about trying to figure stuff out, and if they just bump into the right places at the right time and hold on to that opening, also that energy, someone in their teens has unbelievable amounts of energy. It's usually of course put into finding someone of the opposite sex, and that's usually where we put our energy, right? Or in my case, I was playing hockey every day. But if some of that energy gets, I got questions, I'm going to find those answers. The amount of energy we have available at that age is so vast that, again, it's another thing that not only the time frame but the time of our life, we could literally if someone like 16 or 17 put their energy in for like a year into wanting to know the truth of reality, they might do it and literally be done, like know it all in a year, because they've got so much reserves of power within them. And still they're close enough, I think, to their incarnation that they probably still, even at like 16, 17, 18, could still get some of these pre-birth memories and could still begin to remember what happened, how did I get in here, why did I come in here, what contracts what agreements did I make before I come in here. So I think there's even more things they can unravel, that if somebody starts when they're 50 or 60 years old, it's a much more challenging journey because there's less energy of it. Even though we have more life experience, someone at that age, we have less energy available to put into the work we do.
Yeah. And it makes me think like the cycles of like, hard times make like hard men. And I think we're heading towards hard times. And then there's going to be this generation alpha coming up, and they're going to be entering the hard times. And like maybe that generation will be like a lot better than the previous few that have been
No,
around. Cause no.
no, because like I say, this world is ending. This
Yeah.
world is going to end. It's either going to be you're going into the metaverse and you're going to get plugged in and you're going to become a human slash robot. You're going to be which makes sense. Again, if it's energetic, like I've talked about before, if this is the energy source and you're pulling energy from a thing over here and there's space between you, well, you're losing energy when you pull that in just from the space. So if you can plug in directly into the system, there's no energy loss. So it would make sense that they want to do something like that, just from the standpoint of saving energy loss.
Yes. Like
So that,
Robert
yeah, so
Monroe.
that's what yeah, so that's what's coming. Guaranteed, that's how this realm is going. Unless there's some sort of massive world revolution that changes it all, I don't see that happening realistically. So this realm, I don't hold much hope for this realm, but I hold great hope for certain individuals and groups of people who, like I say, will be able to take the turn and will be able to leave that behind and go to a place that is maybe not the exit completely, but is going to be certainly much closer to the exit, and is going to be a place where things run in a much more um, realistically non-insane way.
Right. Like if a reset occurs and humanity isn't wiped out, I think that the next like batch of humans are going to be like transhumanists. It's going to be like half robot, half human. Because like remember Robert Monroe in his book Far Journeys, where he talks about that's where the term loosh comes from, this book from this really popular astral projector spiritualist guy. And he was looking at them creating new realities in order to extract more and more loosh out of the new population of humans. And it's like, what better way to extract it and have no energy loss if we're half machine?
Yeah. Right. And what's so strange about Robert Monroe, for the people who have looked into him, is okay, he's one of the fathers of the out-of-body experience. The Monroe Institute is one of the forefront of this experience. This, well, where he talked about loosh is only in one chapter of his book, Far Journeys. It's chapter 12. He apparently, after putting that chapter together, which came from an out-of-body experience he had, where he ran into these alien beings on it, and they told him all this information. He went into like a 3-month depression. I don't think he left his house for 3 months. Then he came out again, never talked about it again. Like potentially one of the greatest pieces of information that's been given to the human race. He just stopped talking about it. The Institute itself, I know a number of people have called them and tried to get, well, can you tell us more about loosh? Can you tell us more about, and they refuse to talk about it. They just ignore it. And it's like, that to me is the strangest part of the whole story, is not the presentation of the loosh itself, but why does him and everybody else now involved with Robert Monroe want nothing to do with that information?
Yeah, I
To me,
know.
that's really strange.
Yeah, like Tom Campbell is another big name at the Monroe Institute, and I don't think he's talked about it at all in any of his 3 books on My Big Toe. Not once.
Good one.
Mhm.
And I mean, literally, if it's not the greatest revelation of human knowledge, then at the very least you should be presenting, well, here's why we don't think it is. This is our official
Yeah.
stand on it. And they just have zero, you know. It would be like me coming out and saying, yeah, I was walking here around Scandinavia and I found the largest pyramid in the world. No one knows about it. It's the most amazing thing ever. Oh, let's go see it. No, I don't want to show anybody it. It's just, don't worry about it. Forget about it.
Right.
What? That's kind of what it's like. It's the strangest thing. So I wonder if someone somewhere had a little chat with Mr. Monroe and told him it's going to be in your best interest to not speak about this ever again.
Yeah, do you think maybe that's from like the selling of books, because it doesn't sell as well if you give people this information because it scares people?
Oh, I don't think it'd be that necessarily. I mean, I can see, of course, you've got this problem. As soon as you have an organization and what you sell is happiness, right? You can't,
Right.
truth doesn't sell. So you're not going to make much money if you're selling truth. I'm certainly a testament to that.
Mm.
But you have to sell things that people want to buy. So that's one possibility. But I think enough people, certainly over the years, have been really interested in this one chapter and they would like to know more. So I wouldn't have been surprised if they put out another book, the book on loosh, a whole book just on that. They could forget about it and go back to all their other stuff. But I bet you it would have sold really well, especially in the Carlos Castaneda era of the 70s, when so many people were reading his books. And I think a book on loosh by Robert Monroe would have sold wonderfully well. So I
Yeah.
don't think it would be that. It's got to be something about, somehow Monroe himself decided, I don't want to talk about this anymore for some reason, and never even talked about why he didn't want to talk about it. So it's just weird. It's
Mhm.
just weird.
So another spiritual book I wanted to bring up to you is the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I don't know if you've like skimmed through it at all, but is there any like Gnostic concepts in that book? Is there anything like any valuable information you think in that?
Definitely there would be valuable information. I didn't go through it too deeply because I was spending so much time working with the Egyptian texts. So we have the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is quite similar actually to the bits I've read of the Tibetan one. But the Egyptian book, the one that's known as the Book of the Dead to people, which is actually called the Book of Becoming Light, I think is the best way of saying it into English, would be the best translation. Book of Becoming Horus, or the Book of Becoming Light. It happens to be the most well known, but to me, it's not the most valuable text. That would be the pyramid texts, the pyramids in Saqqara, and it would be the book of what is in the Duat. And I go through all of those books in my Power of Then book.
Mm.
The Book of the Dead it's sort of, it's been turned into like a Christian religious presentation of like sin and karma and being a good boy and girl, but it's not like that at all. And in fact, I know the Egyptian Book of the Dead mirrors a lot of things that are in the Nag Hammadi text. There's all sorts of Nag Hammadi texts that I could mirror in various chapters of the Book of the Dead. What I have read about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because a lot of that is, again, it's about trying to prepare you for what they call these bardos, for these, what you're going to face in the after death realm. And that's really our escape point. I mean, I think we can exit the matrix like here right now. I think literally, if we knew what to do, like perhaps the Maya and the Anasazi did as a group, where they may have just left as a giant group, I think you can do it without dying per se. But I think that's a tremendous amount of work to know how to do it while still actually trapped in this layer of the matrix. But once we have that after death state, and before we have been sucked into the white light tunnel, and before the things have been done, we have this giant window. But in that window is going to be a lot of tricks and deceptions being played. And a lot of what the Book of the Dead is trying to do, both of them, is giving you the interactions that are likely going to happen, the games that are going to try to be played with you so that you're one step ahead of them and you know what to do in response. So it becomes challenging because the translation of these texts are not presenting it that way. So first you have to get the book itself. You have to deal with the translation of the way the translator thinks the translation is, and then you have to start massaging the data to say, okay, if it's really talking about this, how does what seems to be there relate to that? So it's a massive study, and it helps if anyone's thinking of doing it, no matter what area it is. I suggest you get a number of different translations and cross-reference translation to translation and try to get what's really being said here, because I think it is very valuable. But if you take it on just the way it's being laid out, I don't think it's going to help too much.
Yeah, like, there's a lot of controversy with Zachariah Sitchin and his translations of the Anunnaki texts. Do you think that that's similar? Do you think that he made some mistakes possibly?
That seems to be the case. Yeah, seems to be
Yeah.
that. And a lot of things were not just, I might have not even mistakes, might have been he just made things up to
Yeah.
suit certain purposes. But then there's other things that would have been clear translation. So you're back to, you've almost got to go back then and do it yourself, which of course is always the best possibility if you can do it anyway. It's another problem with the Nag Hammadi fragments or the Nag Hammadi codexes, is that translating out of Coptic is really, really difficult. It's the way the language is structured, and the way the word play and it's not an easy. So we get translations even of the Nag Hammadis, which we're bringing out of Greek, and it's like, if I have the opportunity, I would love to have somebody who knows ancient Greek, ancient Coptic, to be able to work directly from the codexes in front of us, so that somebody could be saying, yeah, I see this translation, but that's not really right, it's this. You take a modern Bible, modern like New Testament, and how different that is if you could have somebody who speaks early languages, be they like ancient Greek or earlier languages, and they translate a Bible from those languages, how completely different things become when you see a direct translation from something older. So we always have these issues of translation, and particularly the older the language gets, the more difficult the translation becomes. I tried to do the pyramid text once. I sat down for a while and I was trying to really translate the pyramid text, because the pyramid text for me was such an amazing experience. The first time I was with them, I saw them first in some of the pyramids you can go into in Saqqara freely, the Pepi Pyramid, Teti Pyramid. But I got special permission to go into the Pyramid of Unas, which is the most famous of the texts. And at that time, it was off limits. But I got the permission to go in. And when I was in there, so I had the pyramid alone. And I remember one of the first things I did is I put my hand on, because they're beautifully still painted. They have the paint on them, and I touched them, and it felt like an electrical lightning bolt fired into my arm, like literally just, and it almost felt like it was going to blow my arm off. And I mean, I got my hand off there really, really quick, and I realized okay, this is a whole nother level of what these things are than I ever imagined. I would touch others, but now I touch them very carefully, and I would go just really slowly to them. And if I felt the energy charge was too great, then I would stop, and I would find that point. But I was able to start feeling the hieroglyphs. I was realizing that they're not just things carved into walls; they're literally energetic. And then I had the experiences in Karnak and near Luxor, what I talked about in some of the other videos you may have seen, where the walls began changing after a certain meditative state, and different reliefs and different walls and different hieroglyphs were appearing on the wall. And I realized I'm not hallucinating this. They've actually built these things in holographic layers, and we just, because we're using a certain aspect of what we call our mind, we're only seeing the wall as it seems to be all the time. But there are multiple layers energetically, and as you learn how to alter these, I guess, how to tune, how to be like John
Mm.
Murdoch, you start seeing the other and other and other. And I've had this happen a few times in Egypt. And maybe if you get a chance to, yeah, do a tour of Mexico, because I had similar, not similar, but types of energetic experiences that were kind of like that. Like at Palenque, I had things like that were going on with the walls at Palenque. Um, Teotihuacan does have these really unique murals, but it's very hard to get in to see them. Again, I don't know if you still need permissions now to get in to see the underground murals are there, but I think it's the same thing. It's multiple layers, multiple holographic pieces all together. And once you start to know that's what the ancient world was doing, you gain a totally different respect for how much they knew, because we're working on one level, they're working on like 40.
Yeah, and just imagine how powerful that energy was back when it was actually being used by these ancients, and that kind of adds credibility to that whole idea where people are like, "Where did the Mayans go?" Like they bury underneath these pyramids and find no bodies whatsoever, and it's like they just disappeared. And it's like maybe they had
They
some
just
access to some technology that made them just kind of like spontaneously combust or like something, or go into the
Yeah,
next realm.
yeah, I wouldn't say it's technology per se. I mean, I think it's just knowledge, but that's a highly possibility. The Anasazi are another one, right? That's another group of highly knowledgeable people who, and okay, we'll take the Maya. There were 20 million of them, maybe more. And the problem are, I don't care, they're anthropologists. The anthropologists have had is that they knew there were these massive cities, and then all of a sudden the cities are empty and they got no bodies. They got no pits, they got no places, they got nothing. They can't find where any of them died. They try to make excuses. Well, obviously it's not warfare and it can't be plagues because we'd have the bodies. So it must be, well, they were running out of food or something and they had to go to other areas. But like, what other areas? They have no tracking. So a theory that could make sense is they just decided one way or another, this reality's gotten too insane and they're not interested in it anymore. And rather than leave individually, they figured out how to leave as giant groups. And so that's Carlos Castaneda stuff as well. And that's stuff I've written about. I've never shared any of it completely. I've had this stuff in like a folder for like 15 years. And in the next book I write in 2023, I'll finally put this stuff out. And I think there's a correlation of some things Castaneda was hinting at, and the possibility of whole groups of people just leaving. Now, whether they leave and go into they've left and not maybe not left the matrix, have they gone into just another realm, like a holding realm or a different finer place where they can readjust in the cave, readjust in the matrix, and at least, well, we're not going back there, but we'll use this place to find the exit. I don't know, but it's a possibility that they just said we're done and we're gone. Same thing with whoever built the pyramids in Egypt, right? We have no idea who built those things. They're so old that they're not the pharaonic Egyptians, and so we have, again, well, who actually built them? We have no idea, and what happened to them? So again, maybe it's they did what they needed to do. They made their energetic work here, and then they finally just said goodbye.
Yeah. So I was listening to this interview you were doing with Sam Tripoli, and you were talking about how the World Fair came about in the 1860s or something, right after the Civil War. And you were speculating that possibly that happened right after another reset. And like, I didn't really follow exactly what you were saying because I'm very new to the idea of the World Fair. I was wondering if you could like extrapolate more on that. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Of course.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, the World's Fairs were such a bizarre experience of exploration for me. That happened, that came about in 2019 when I was in Florence and I was studying cathedrals to try to see how they worked as machines, how the energetic structures work. So I was beginning to study how the cathedrals were built and the shapes and the towers and the domes and what was working with that energetically. And then somehow in the course of that, when I got home, I ran into the Chicago Exposition of 1893. And I looked at, and the thing was it was 700 acres with the most spectacular buildings you can imagine, all with towers and domes and just monumental structures. And then as soon as it was done, it was destroyed. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, it's not just this one place. This is happening all over the world constantly from a period of about 1851 to 1915 is when this sort of thing ended. Giant, massive events supposedly built in record times of 2 years with no machines, no equipment, and then as soon as it's done, bring in dynamite and blow it up. So they were the stupidest things possible, and I realized I've got to study this. And once you begin to study it and start seeing the buildings themselves are a question, but then it became a question of, well, what are they actually doing at these fairs? What's actually being presented at these things? What's the actual message that's coming out from these things? And that was even more bizarre than trying to understand the buildings, the actual fairs themselves. And then when you start trying to put it in the time frame, it's in this time frame starting at 1850 in England is when they first began. And all of a sudden you have the first one in the United States in 1876, just after the Civil War. And it's also at a time when you've got these orphan trains that are running, where you have all these children that have no adults and they're being shipped all over the world. You've got insane asylums being built all over the world with no explanation of why you're building, why all these insane people are, why are they insane? Why do they all need to be bigger than the Medici palaces of Florence? And it indicated to me that this was like the starting point of a whole new population. Whatever the population had been before was eliminated. There may have been some children left, which would make sense. If you're starting an entirely new indoctrinated society, you would start with children because they'll have no memory of the past life, the past world, and they will believe whatever you tell them, particularly if they're coming out of a traumatic experience. If you look like you've been helping them, they will, of course, turn over all of their authority and help to you. And within a generation or two, within a generation, actually, you've got a completely presented mentally what you want. I think that's what the fairs were. The fairs were like the movies and TV of the era, where they were the propaganda indoctrination tool of a completely new human population. So for me, that became like a marker point of saying that actually probably happened. And when you go through the city fires in the United States and so many things of the 1800s that make no sense whatsoever, I realized probably a huge amount of the human population was eliminated, and somehow a new population was brought in. It's something that I talked about with some other guys with study the fair as well recently. And when you look at photos of the fair with people who are there, the people who are attending it, they look so out of place. They look like they're literally like they're just on another planet. And people said, well, it's so grand, it's so magnificent. Of course, it would be like somebody living in the country going to New York City for the first time. They're going to be in awe. Like, yeah, but it's more. There's something about just the feeling looking at them in the pictures that they just like, it's literally like their first day out. That's what it feels like. It's like their first day on Earth. The fairs are the strangest things I've come across. And yeah.
Yeah, that whole time period is strange. Like, I love what you said about the mental asylums looking like Medici's castle. These things were so elaborate. They're the most like beautiful structures I've ever seen, and they use them for mental asylums. Like, how many, yeah, like you said, how many crazy people were there, and why would you put them in your most beautiful
Yeah.
buildings? And then yeah, every major city had a giant fire at that point in time too.
And we have to remember, so the giant fires are really weird. So you go through this supposed 80 years of fires where, again, the cities all get burned down and then supposedly magically rebuild themselves in a year, just magic. They just show up. But they pushed the fires over like 100-year period to try to make it seem coincidental. Perhaps the fires all took place in like a 2-year period, and they lied about the dates. If that happened and they told us the truth, well, we would have to start saying, well, it's not coincidence. Something's going on. Something is causing all the fires, probably some kind of warfare. So what's going on? Recall that in 1895, a book comes out by H.G. Wells called War of the Worlds, in which supposedly an alien group comes and battles humans on the earth, right? Which became that famous Orson Welles radio show in 1938, which the people who heard it went literally insane with fear. Right? People actually committed suicide. They killed themselves because they thought the aliens were invading the Earth. And was interesting to me is that's so irrational. That's so irrational a response. It's like there has to be something within our genetics, deep within our like our DNA, that was being triggered. That the people, that it wasn't just a mental psychological thing. We were seeing a deep trigger of some memory, and some whatever that memory is, that was coming out from War of the Worlds. And so I'm wondering, did H.G. Wells write a story, or did he write like a documentary historical novel? I don't know.
That's cool. Yeah, speaking of other books, I noticed that David Icke, he recently released a book called The Trap, and I was wondering if you knew about that. Is that like your new book at all, do you think?
I have it on my shelf. I bought it just because I was
Oh, really?
curious.
I just ordered it
So
too.
I've
It
read it.
hasn't come in. So yeah, it
Yeah,
is
I've read
similar.
it. No, it's nothing like my book at all, actually.
Mhm.
Um, or maybe like 3 or 4 paragraphs are similar, and the rest of our books are completely different. He has a totally different. I don't know. It's, for me, it was interesting. It's like that piece of information, which is Exit the Cave for me, is like half a chapter or maybe one chapter, and the rest of the book is about a whole bunch of other stuff.
Mhm.
So I found that just curious. But so no, our books are not actually similar, but one of his chapters matches a bit of Exit the Cave, and you'll see it when you read it. I'll be curious. Send me your opinion of that book when you get it. I'll be curious to hear about it.
Yeah, I will. I was also wondering, like, what are some good YouTube channels that talk about this kind of idea as well? I know about Forever Conscious Research channel, Overwatch channel. I don't
Yeah.
know if Wes Penry has a channel, but these are obviously people you're familiar with.
No. Yeah, I'm familiar with them. Let me just take a quick peek here on my list to see who else I might recommend. Of course, yeah, well, of course, for websites, it would be Wayne Bush's trickedbythelight.com. That one is really, really good. Like you say, Forever Conscious is great. I think Mark does a really good job in going through various near-death experiences, and he gives a really sober presentation of what the person is saying compared to what that might be showing us. So I think I've learned a lot actually listening to Mark.
Yeah.
Another that I think is interesting was called, and I'm just picking it up right here. It's called Free at Last. Yeah, Free at Last. She did a couple of videos of 3 or 4 months ago, all about Soul Trap, Soul Net, et cetera, et cetera. And she hasn't done anything for a while. She's been quiet since. But that was an interesting site as well. There's a number of smaller ones that sort of come and go. Nothing that really like there's nothing that I sort of like I'm going to constantly as a testing ground, you might say, or as a check ground.
Mhm.
um but if I come up with something, I'll let you know. I sort of just bump around sometimes and see what shows up. um but a zeitgeist is certainly happening. I think
Yeah.
both you and I can recognize that somehow in the last 2 or 3 years, like we went through. First, it was flat Earth for a while, and then after flat Earth, we went through the Mandela effect, and then we've gone through the Tartarian mud flood, and now we're in this. Now we're in the idea of soul trap. So something certainly since the 2012, seemingly nothing that happened, has created these upswellings for a while of zeitgeists of people being really interested in information. So I'm starting
Yeah.
to notice more and more people are talking about these things. More and more people are interested in them, certainly, but there's nowhere yet that I could say is as anyone is presenting a whole lot of information. Because of course, one of the problems is we don't really know for sure, right? I don't know what's going to happen for sure after we die. I don't know for sure who created this realm and how it was created. It's all theses based on our experience and what we've gone through and what our research takes us. So it can be hard to produce a tremendous amount of information on things that are at this point theory. And that's kind of my hope over the next 4 to 6 months, assuming the world doesn't go completely batshit crazy, is to what's the next step in gaining hands-on experience on these ideas that we're talking about. So it goes from this kind of a theory to I've got direct experience now. I feel more confident in what I want to say, and then maybe some things can start to expand, and hopefully others will be doing it in their own way, so that we can bring out. And I know people have experiences, they have information, but they've always felt they felt nervous sharing it, because sometimes they've shared it with probably friends or family, and they say, "Oh, you're crazy. What are you talking about?" So, oh, they've learned to just be quiet. So I know there are a lot of people that have pieces of information, and maybe one day we'll have a something will be set up where various people can come and share their information, and like pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, we can start putting it together and get an overall picture.
Yeah, and this can, because this concept does easily come off possibly paranoid, but then you do a great job coming off grounded when it comes to this discussion. That's why a lot of people gravitate
Thanks.
towards you. And not only are more people directly talking about this idea, but you see it more in our TV shows. I can think of 2 recent examples, from like Westworld to, have you also seen Severance on Apple TV?
No.
Matt from Quantum of
Severance.
Consciousness, he talks about this
Okay.
show. And
Okay.
this gives a wonderful like metaphor to like our higher self, and it sort of steps away from the Westworld concept of us having the memory wipe. I mean, there is a memory
Right.
wipe in Severance, but basically it's these people that work at this office, but there's this new technology where they work their 9 to 5, then they get an aspect of them gets memory wiped, and then they go back in the office each day, so that another version of themselves can just live their lives almost like they never stepped into the office to begin with, because it's like their lower self
Right.
is in the office doing all the dirty work and they're out just living their life. And then the lower self starts to realize what's going
Mm.
on, and it starts to rebel against the higher self. And it kind of gives a dark idea of like, maybe it's us doing this to ourselves. Maybe our higher self is purposely putting us in this world like a scientific experiment, which almost makes sense. I know you'll probably disagree with me, but it almost makes
No.
sense, because like you want a control group, you want a control group that you can trust. It would be unethical to do this to somebody else outside yourself, but you still want to study what happens.
Experiment is also high on the list. I didn't say it enough times, maybe in the book and other interviews, but that's also high on the list. That would make sense to what's going on. It would also explain the memory wipe, because every time, if possible, you put you put the rat in the maze, and you've changed something in the maze, you want to see the rat react clear every time. So you can say this is an experiment, and one of the things Castaneda talks about is this whole place is simply to gain life experiences. That the eagle just wants to eat our life experiences. It doesn't really want our energy. It winds up eating both because we don't understand that, and that's a big part of the recapitulation. Is we learn how to give up what it wants, which is data, life experiences, so we can keep our energy and move on. We've completed our task. So that also lends to the idea. So experiment is a highly likely that's another highly likely, and they can all still be together. There could be multiple things going on. It's also sometimes, if you try to get, oh, this is the answer to where we are, well, there could be 4 or 5 different answers that logically fit together in some giant weird puzzle. But yeah, I would, if I had my list of possibilities, experiment is also high on the list. And that we're here for, all they want is data from us. They
Yeah.
just want information of what we do and what we don't do, and they don't really care what we do or don't do. They just want data.
And for the viewers who aren't aware, he was referring to the eagle from Carlos Castaneda's book, The Eagle's Gift, where the time of death, the demiurge is represented by an eagle. And we have a chance to escape the eagle if we give the eagle our life experiences instead of just our energy. And to me, that represents giving it our ego, everything that was us in the material realm, and us being able to sacrifice that in order to move on.
Yeah, that's the number one thing that happened in my death experience, right? When I went through the moment of recognizing being dead, and it wasn't, I can't say I necessarily gave it up, but in a sense I did, because I had no interest to keep living. I was comfortable to just say, I'm going to die and I'm fine with it. That's okay. I'm just going to have front row seats to my death. And all the things I ever thought of as me just literally were no longer there. They just disintegrated. No mind, no thoughts, no feelings, no memories, no hopes, no fears, like nothing. It was just, but what was left was a clear awareness, was a very high perceptive awareness of everything, and what I would call clusters of information that would just come up like explode, be totally understood, and they would just come up in like microseconds. And that's all that was existing. And when I realized all the rest of it, including the physical form, that's just that, that's a simulated thing. It's not actually, it's not true. It's not me. It's just something that me is using in this reality. So I can see what you just said. Something similar is, if all of that is given up, so all that's left is awareness, um, what can the ego hold of you? Nothing. Everything that you might call in Buddhist terms grasping, everything you can grasp to is gone. If there's nothing left to grasp to, well, there's nothing left to hold you into the realm. That's another theory of how you would go. If it's, you go through the eye of the needle when everything is left but the one last thing that you are, right?
Yeah. And some people, they find this information kind of scary, but I find it reassuring knowing that my material person isn't actually real. So it's like I can't actually make any mistakes here. I forget who said it, but the only real mistake you can make in this world is selling your soul.
Yeah.
Have you heard that?
Yeah, I would put that up there. I guess if there's a small mistake that could be made, again, I hate to call them mistakes, but it would just be not using your time to gain a complete understanding of who you are, where you are, why you are, and what's the best road and choice for you to make. Just because I'm making a particular choice and I'm saying, I know I'm not coming back, that doesn't mean that should be anybody else's choice. But whatever choice that you do make, I think it is valuable to have created a space where you're able to truly make decisions and not at key moments feel pressured into what do you need to do. As I've come to see so often how many times I've been, just in this life, I've been manipulated to do certain things or make certain choices or talk to certain people. And often those were never good things to do. They were never things that were helpful to my journey. They were things that actually created pain and suffering and difficulty for a lot of people. And started realizing later, who or what's manipulating me into all this stuff. I like to think it's my guide, it's my higher self. Oh, they're giving me an experience to grow and learn. No, the best learning I ever got are from teachers who were really kind to me and helpful and spent time with me and, listened to my challenges, and probably not ones who came with a stick and kept whacking me over the back of the head. I could say certainly from hockey coaches. I never learned anything but stick in the back of the head coach. So why would life want to think that's a good way for us to learn? It should, if we were really learning, it would do it in the way that is actually positive. It's helpful. So all of these things are indicating to me that it's trying to take us one way. So why don't we get really clear, focused in our own? Because that's, like you said, so many people, when they read my book or hear my stuff, they say, well, you're really negative about this world. Well, yeah, but I'm also very positive, because the end result of getting through all the negativity is your true power, your true totality, the completeness of who and what you are. And it seems like from everything I've come across, we have more power than even the demiurge. Everything in this reality does not have the same amount of power as individual us. If you and me and others together, it's even greater as a group. Granted, the journey is alone, but sometimes we can go together to build up our energy and our power. So when we realize we're actually more powerful than the demiurge, it makes more sense why the demiurge and the minions are spending so much time trying to trick us, trying to fool us, trying to waste our energy, trying to get us distracted on a bunch of garbage. Because if we just harness what's inside ourselves, we have complete and total autonomy. So it sounds negative at the beginning, but that's just to break these false belief walls and all the deceptions we've been under, so that maybe we can finally step back through them and say, okay, what's true? And if it's true that I'm more powerful than even the demiurge, that's a pretty amazing thing to come to finally.
Yeah, it's like this information's only scary if you're really holding on to this material realm. And a lot of people in modern society are, because there's so many atheists now, more than there ever have been before. And it's like this one life is all they get. So, of course, they're going to do whatever the authorities tell them to do. They'll take whatever jab they need to take in order to prolong their life even longer.
Yeah, it's a pretty dangerous program, and that's, the survival instinct is a program. And everything in here has it. I need to live another day. I need to live another day, and we'll do anything to live another day, as opposed to, I think I'd like to live another day well. I think I'd like to live another day clear and calm and relatively being of value. I think that's a big one. It's not just I'm going to, but I'm being of value to others. And it's like, but if that's not going to happen and it's just going to be continued insanity, then not that I'm going to end my life, because I think that's a bad choice too, because you need to learn as much as you can. But if I'm not going to do something just to keep living and give up my autonomy and give up my own self, I will just say, well, if that's what happens, that happens, but I'll be ready for it. But that survival instinct is, and it's an ego, it's a type of ego, and it's very hard to start overcoming that. That's just within us. And then we're surrounded by so many, we call them non-player characters, right? So many people out there, they're not really people. They're just literally, yeah, they're like characters in a video game that are just there to populate the world. And they're just going to do everything that the world wants them to do. So it gets more and more difficult if we're trying to make our own decisions based on what we see others around us are doing, not realizing a lot of the people around us aren't even making a decision at all. They're not even potentially even people. They're just robots that are plugged into the system to do what the system tells them. So
Yeah, I've
that's why it
heard.
becomes so important to, yeah, move into your own power to make your own choices.
Right. And I've heard you ask this question on a few interviews. You ask, how many people in this realm do you think are actually like real and how
Yeah.
many are like
What
NPCs? Like,
percentage?
what's
Yeah.
percentage?
What's your number?
So I feel like, well, I feel like in order to answer this question, we need to ask the question, are children, is it possible for a child to be an NPC? Which I don't think it is. I think that, like Carlos Castaneda said, children come into this world like a glowing ball of light. And I think it takes till about like fourth or fifth grade for like the indoctrination to really seep in. And then they could potentially become like lesser than what they actually are. So if you think about that, like every child to like fourth grade is probably like a real human being. And not only that, but there's a lot of different stages of awakening. Like take, for example, like, Russell Brand and his YouTube channel. Yeah. So he's someone like he's cool, but I can't stomach listening to it because it's such newbie information. Like I'm so beyond that. I'm the old guard. But like it's reassuring to see there's a lot of smart people listening to him that are waking up. So I know that you've given out the figure that there's about 10% or less, but I'm saying maybe you're just looking at the old guard is 10% or less, but there's a bunch of other people, if you include children and the newly awakened, stepping into that percentage. So my percentage would be a little bit higher than yours. I'd say it probably sits around 33 to 40% who aren't NPCs.
Okay. It's, of course, I'm always curious to what everybody else thinks and why they think that. And I guess for me, the question starts to all of a sudden happen. Well, if it's true that, say that if it, and I'm saying if history is true, and I'm not saying it is, but oh well, in the 1200s there were only 100 million people in the world, and now we've got 8 billion. Where did all the souls come from, and why are all the souls? Why were they hanging around for all this time just to, And it would make sense if, well, actually, probably the same number of humans or souls are here. Um, all that's happening is they're creating is you're creating a seemingly bigger and bigger reality, more and more complexity, because complexity would equal more experiences, more and more possibility for conflict, difficulty, suffering, distraction, focus. So the bigger and bigger and bigger it gets, the more and more you might be able to get humans to drop into deeper into the material world. So I just began thinking maybe the number of humans hasn't changed at all. We're just seeing bigger and bigger growth of those around it to make it look like a much more larger experience than it really is. So that kind of played into my numbers of like, yeah. So from my perspective, I would see no reason why a 2-year-old child can't be a fully a robot. I can play a video game, and normally video games don't have children in them, but why not? They could just as easily be. So for me, it's like, but granted, like you say, if you do, let's put it this way, if you do feel you've definitely got a human child in front of you, what an opportunity to learn, like you say, because they're still so many of the things that of this forward installation are not in them, whether it's 10% or 50%, who knows how many it is. There's so much you can learn because they are still not fully here. They are still partially in the other realm. They're still partially in the afterbirth realm. They've got so much potential information and knowledge, and so much potential, like you were saying before, how much of them still remember their past life in quite detail. It's one thing yeah, if I had like a 3 or 4 year old child around, I would want to ask them if they remember. Do you remember where you used to live
Yeah,
before
same.
this? Do you remember being somewhere else? And just kind of without giving them any specific, just see if something would come up, because I think it'd be curious if, as parents to, or a close relative could ask those questions and see if something does develop. Because like you said, the ones we have of the children who are presenting some of the information, like the kid with the World War II plane that he crashed in around Iwo Jima or something, the kid that I talk about who remembered his last wife and all this. I mean, those, and the detail and the verification when they take the kid to meet the people and the families and whatever, that there's no way this kid could know that information, like absolutely no possible way. And it's always correct. It's always 100% right. So it's indicating some of that is still there. And of course, I wish I had someone, my parents were asking me when I was 3 or 4, do you remember where you used to come from? Do you remember where you were before this? And see what I might have said. It might have been, it might have been helpful. I have guesswork. I have some ideas of what that last life was, but that's kind of guessing. I wish I had some things that my parents wrote down when I was 3. By the way, you said this, and this. Does this make sense to you? Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I remember you talking, I think it was on Legit Bat podcast about this one kid you knew who would refer to herself in the third person. Right. And it's like she
Yeah,
wasn't indoctrinated by thinking of herself as I yet. It was like
right.
she still like separated her material self from where she originally came from. And then
Yeah,
eventually the parents corrected her, like, no, I need a cookie, not like Melissa or whatever needs a cookie. And
yeah.
then she
It
slowly
was
changed.
amazing. It was just, yeah. She
Yeah.
would always say, "Yeah, Sally wants a drink," and if you, no, no, you want a drink, and she was clear. No, Sally wants a drink. She
Yeah.
was very clear that whoever was speaking was not Sally. That Sally was not the person, the thing making the conversation. It was an incredible, yeah, like I said, it was incredible to watch. And watching my parent friends, no, you're Sally. Say, I want a drink. Sally wants a drink. And I obviously at some point in time, she would have broken down and made the same thing we all did. Say, I want a drink. Sally and me are now one and the same. But that child, at least in her case, was still, there was still a separation. The material thing and her were not the same. It's
Right.
so there's so many things that can be garnered from, yeah, being around a small child. If of course, it's for most, it's difficult, it's time consuming. People are running around with 1,000 things and helping with their kid. They don't have time to start sort of examining deeper subjects. But if you have that
Right.
opportunity, I think it's an amazing thing, not just for you, but for the child later on to potentially, when it gets 10 or 15 or 20, you can start saying, hey, by the way, when you were 3, I had these conversations with you and this is what you said.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah. What you just said kind of reminded me of something I heard from James True recently. I'm sure you know James True. Where
Mm-hmm.
he talks about people having different apertures, where like some people have very open apertures, so they're open to like learning the truth about this world and new information. Other people have to operate at a very closed aperture. They're like, I got to take my kid to soccer practice at 4 o'clock. I don't have
Yeah,
time to look at this reincarnation
right.
information, you know, and that's okay
Exactly. I
if they
mean,
feel that way, whatever.
it's totally okay. I mean, yeah, how does somebody who, yeah, works all day, has 2 kids they've got to look after, they've got the house to deal with, they've got mortgage payments to focus on, they got their sister they don't like constantly calling them, where do you have time to think? And I think, I feel that's part of why this world's been structured the way it is, that the more people that it can be pushed into these realms where you're so busy because you have to be, just to make it through the day, you lose the opportunity to do any of this. It's one of the things I was so grateful. I was a stand-up comedian when I started my exploration and my work. So that meant I worked like maybe 3 weekends a month, maybe 2 weekends a month is all I actually worked, right? So I had like all day, every day around that to study and research and focus. I wasn't making a ton of money, but I made enough to get by, enough to, when I needed to travel to somewhere to see something, I could do it. But I had all this free time to study. And that to me was a gift. I didn't totally realize the gift at the time, but it's like, to really work into this stuff, you need some free time. And if you have a life that's really busy, you then have to create like little retreats for yourself. I know that's been really big, where it's like once, even if it's just once a year, where you have 7 days and you go to a cabin by yourself with no husband, no wife, no kids, no whatever, no phones, and you at least have 7 days to just be with your own mind. just that is a valuable thing if you can create it, because it allows after a day to kind of just let it all start to settle in. And I know even sometimes I take a few days of like complete screen breaks where I don't look at screens, I don't do anything, I don't even answer email, nothing. And even just that begins to really get the focus going back within again, and just really gets you to even think on a more greater level about things you sometimes forget to think about.
Yeah. Let me just look at the chat real quick. I haven't really had a chance
Yeah.
to. Oh man, it's blowing up. They love you, Howdy. Let's see.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Oh, Sweaty Spaghetti, what's up? Just a lot of love. Sarah Ashley, Amanda, thanks for tuning in. Uh, let's see. Korek said the shock in the arm part. I meant what? Sorry, there's
I
just a
was
lot of
talking
like
about
jump.
when I was touching the
Oh,
hieroglyphs in the pyramid.
yeah. Yeah, that's why I want to go to Teotihuacan because, I'm in the United States. Mexico isn't too bad of a trip. So I'm going to head over there and check out those pyramids. She also says, I never had past life memories, but I've been feeling so much deja vu recently. Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, that could be a
And
sign that you're
so
going
for
through
that
something.
person, who made that comment about the deja vu, my question for you is, do you have experiences, either dreams or things you remember that you feel are like parts of your life? Like that's an experience. I did that, but then you can't possibly place the experience for real in time. Or if there was somebody there and you asked them about it, they say, no, that never happened. We were never at the zoo together. What are you talking about? But that's a real experience to you, but you can't verify it. Is that person answering that they have those as well? Because I get tons of
Yeah.
those.
Yeah. And like, does that make you think that maybe there's multiple dimensions that we operate from and somehow that's seeped into this one and you remember it somehow?
Yeah, because I had an experience in 1999 where I saw a parallel self die. So I saw
Mm,
myself in a parallel realm die in a car crash. And it's where I realized that there are maybe hundreds of thousands, millions of me's, which again would make sense if we're in a type of experiment, or at least in a place where they want life experiences. Well, to only have one life in one body is a minimal experience. You'd want to have a million experiences where everything is possible, all data is possibly collected. And I began to start sifting through some of these parallel lives. And I began to see where I lived, what I did, what jobs I had, what people I was married to. And it was interesting because in certain cases, I had interactions with people in this life that were really unique, that wouldn't make sense, but does make sense when I see, oh, I knew them in this way in this other life. So that makes sense as to why I had this kind of connection, positively or negatively, in this life. So I'm 100% behind that. There's lots of me's out there. Some of them really nice, some of them not so nice, some of them bright, some of them not so bright. It's back to that again. If you fail at something, well, probably the you in another life succeeded.
yeah. And maybe that has something to do with the Mandela effect too, where we have these false memories of things that occurred.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Right.
100%. That would totally make sense if things that they call it bleed, right? I wrote a story in Falling for Truth that I bumped into where an amazing story. A guy had a favorite hardware store that that's the only place he would shop in town. And then it finally closed, and it was this going away party. Everybody liked the owner, and they were getting rid of the thing and building a parking lot. So 3 or 4 or 5 years later, he was talking to his wife and he needed something from the tool yard, and he was complaining, oh, I can't go to my favorite tool store anymore. I just hate it. It's not there. I said, what do you mean? I just drove by it again yesterday. It's always been there. What are you talking about? I was there. I was at the party here. And finally, this battle guy, he took his wife, he put her in the car. They drove there so he could show her the parking lot. And of course, the store is there. He goes in to see the guy. He's like, oh, I haven't seen you for a while. Where you been? What are you talking about? Didn't you close the store down? No, what are you talking about? I got a special on these things, by the way. Do you need them? And he's like, he was so confused. He talked about, he just sat in his car for hours, like just sat there. And he began studying what would be called time slips, this idea where Mandela effect like things, where things are there, things are not there. And he put the rest of his life into trying to understand what's going on. And he, along with others, are sort of this idea, this bleed effect, where two different timelines come together for a while, and so one thing changes in the other timeline or doesn't. And it's also similar to some of the stuff talked about in the book, the vertical plane, which is also a book that has a whole mess of time interaction it's an amazing story too. So,
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of something that Matt from Quantum of Conscious has talked about, where he feels like he died with his friend Greg chopping down a tree one day. And it's like, am I even like alive? Was that a parallel world where that happened? And like, it's weird because I have a situation where I almost died with a friend named Greg as well. So that like tripped me out. And
okay.
I've always thought like maybe I did die then. Like we were supposed to jump off this like waterfall, but then we discovered somehow that the water was only up to our shins and it would have definitely killed me.
Okay.
And I was hell bent on jumping. I was about to, and I don't know why I
Yeah.
didn't.
Um, I think a lot of us who've gone through near-death experiences wonder if we really did die, and in some way, either a part of us moved to this world, or all of us moved here, and we've created. We think about this a lot. Am I just creating a world now that is? I'm trying to keep myself alive, even though I really died, and that's why it's so weird and so transparent or whatever, because I'm not really in the same world I was when I died.
Mhm.
I don't know, because I was having this conversation with a person recently online, and they've also had death experiences, and they were saying all the people that I've been close to, all the people who are my friends, have all also had death experiences. So nobody in my life is not somebody who hasn't had a near death experience in some way, shape, or form. So he's wondering, yeah, is that all it's here? It's a realm of people who have actually died but don't know we're dead, and everybody else is the NPCs are the ones we're populating our world to make it look like a world. And so it goes back to kind of what you said. We're the ones creating the world. We're
Yeah.
the ones actually making the whole thing, thinking that we're still alive when we're not. It's an interesting theory, and I think anybody who's gone through a near-death experience goes there and wonders about that. Yeah, it's a possibility.
Yeah. Oh, there's just one last thing I wanted to bring up because I know in your book you
Yep.
talked about Westworld, and that's a TV show on
Mm.
HBO I really recommend that I feel like talks about the, reincarnation soul trap kind of. And
Yep.
there's a character on there, Dolores and Maeve. They start to realize that they're being used over and over again by Westworld and their memories have been wiped. And then I asked myself, like, yeah, they've been through that traumatic experience, but isn't Dolores a more interesting character after being through Westworld, going through the trauma, then waking up and then causing herself to escape? Kind of like the story of the prodigal son from the Bible. So even though she doesn't remember anything from her past lives, like maybe like at least in the next life you'd have some clout. Like, yeah, I escaped the prison planet of Earth. That's still kind of badass.
Yeah, again, it all depends on what we do remember when we come into the next incarnation. It's we like to think there's carryover. I definitely think there's carryover into the after death state, though, for sure. Whatever we've learned or understood, we take into there. But it makes me, as you know, I wrote in the book, it really makes me wonder about all of some of these great spiritual teachers and people that whose books I had read and had thought for quite a while were on quite a pedestal, that you were going to bring up a question about oneness and all this, and that idea, which is one of the big parts of standard spiritual awakening enlightenment literature. But if they didn't know that a soul trap exists, if they didn't know about a reincarnation trap, maybe they would have just gone to the white light. They would have just followed Buddha, or they would have followed Jesus, and oh, great, it's a and if they came back here and got their memory wiped, maybe they forgot all of the work that they did, even though it wasn't complete. They would have forgot all of it, and they're back to day one. Now, maybe there's something in them that will, if they chose to go to this material, they catch on to it faster. They notice it quicker than before. I don't know, but if we've each had 500 lives, I guarantee we've all had lives where we've been philosophers. We've all had lives where we've, been in various organizations. We've all had lives where we've been in mystery schools, and so all of us should be able to have this, some of it accessed. The question is, why do a few of us access it and go forward in this material and others don't? Obviously, it seems like trauma plays a big role in it, that very few people will, particularly material like this, which is challenging to the core of our being, can go there if there isn't personal experience, or at least trauma within our close family unit, where something really bad has happened to a really close family member or close friend, where we can begin saying, hey, maybe this place is not so great. Maybe there's something that is really wrong with this place. And if your life happens, there are some people who've had a pretty perfect life. They've had no problems whatsoever. They've had great parents. Everything is run pretty smoothly. They've had great jobs. They get married. They have great kids, and it's like they're not going to think about this stuff. They can't possibly think about this stuff because there's nothing in their experience that could indicate there's something wrong with reality. Reality is great. You're just not living right. So there's also seems to be trauma in some way has to be part of this particular world, to like a big one, to start pushing people to go, something's wrong with everything I've been told, and I need to go find that's what Joan, a woman's death, who was murdered, an ex-girlfriend of mine who was murdered in 1994. That's what it pushed me to start doing, was to start saying, I thought I was just following the blueprint of how you're supposed to live. And I realized, well, she was following the blueprint perfectly and she's dead. So the blueprint can't be right. And I didn't know what the blueprint was, if there was one, but I knew, well, it's not what everybody's been telling me my whole life. And I said, okay, I'm throwing that in the garbage. Let's see if I can find what it is. So somewhere in some way, trauma is part of this experience. Now, whether we choose to create trauma before we get here so we can offer it like a giant switch, or something just occurs in our reality that gives us that opportunity, I don't know. But it seems to be part of the package.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about Joan because I've heard you talk about her before, and she seemed like that. It seemed like that event was a catalyst for your awakening. Hopefully, I'm not getting too personal here, but I was just curious about it because for those who don't know, Howdy's ex-girlfriend was murdered back when he lived in Canada. I remember he told like Owen Benjamin about it. And he's like, I didn't think stuff like that happened in Canada. Like, if I could ask, like,
Yeah,
what happened?
yeah,
Was
it
it a
does.
random event? Was it someone she knew?
Yeah, I don't want to go into, of course, the details of the story. I only tell my personal experience of it. But there was guilt, of course, involved in it, and because of course it was an ex-girlfriend, so we weren't in any way together. We weren't together very long, but so I had feelings of guilt for a long time that somehow somehow it was my fault for what happened. That if we'd been together, this couldn't have happened, kind of thinking. So it took me quite a while to and it was actually that part, the guilt didn't leave until she appeared in a dream, and we had a conversation one night in my dream. And whether it was really her coming to visit me, whether it was a form of myself manifesting as her to allow my guilt to go away, I don't know which is true. But after that experience, I was able to say, okay, yeah, it's an event that had nothing to do with me. It's time to move on. But it was, like I say, it really did, though, alter my world, because I started saying, the way I've been told to live is wrong. Then the way I've been told I'm supposed to live is wrong, and I got to throw that in the garbage. And but I had nothing to replace it. It's that standard thing. I took the foundation out from under me, and nothing was there to replace it. So I was like, I lived. I like drifted for like 2 to 3 years. That's the best way to describe it. And it was from that drifting and nothing happening, that it was a combination. I was becoming meaner. I was becoming more manipulative, which I didn't like. I started realizing I don't like how I'm becoming. This is not me. This is not, you know, and that's where the depression started to come from. It was from experiences in my early life with my parents. It was from the death. It was from how I was becoming. And I just was sinking and sinking and sinking. And without that Egyptian program coming on TV, without that program coming on the pyramids, when I was at the point of like literally wanting to kill myself, and that program coming on, and me just instantly just like a bolt of lightning going, that's it. That's what I'm supposed to do with my life. I'm supposed to get into those Egyptian pyramids and find out what ancient Egypt knew. They got secrets, and I'm supposed to go get it. And it, like, my whole life, everything just changed. All of the entire energy structure of my being. Like, I had trouble getting out of bed in the morning. The next morning, I was able to go and start reading, like, I don't know, 6 books a day, and I had energy beyond belief for years. So things can change just like that. And I think there are, no matter how bad things are, there are these doorways out there, but we tend to miss them. I don't know why. It was something about this, it was just a television program, and I was flipping channels. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't wanting to watch it. It was like, it was there, and I just, for some reason, turned it on and had it on my television. And then all of a sudden I was like, it just started affecting me. I'm like, that's it. That's my life. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. So the whole event, I mean, I look back now, I couldn't have got there and I couldn't have got to where I am now without Joan's death being a part of it and having to go through, because that's so many people might say, I'm not really a spiritual person. I'm not doing spiritual work. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? I'm dealing with, I had a divorce and I'm having a really tough time going through that and understanding what's going on. Are you really thinking about it? Are you really trying to understand yourself? Yeah, I'm learning a lot about myself. Well, that's it. That's spiritual work. Sitting and meditating all day or saying a mantra or whatever, that's in a sense, that's kind of distraction. That's making yourself feel better. What you're doing is real spiritual work, which is spiraling inward, looking for what's in there, and particularly looking for what's painful in there, what's difficult in there, and looking for understanding and answers. That's it. That's spiritual work. So to me, it looked like I was just in a depression and doing nothing, but I was actually doing spiritual work. And then just certain things changed the life so I could alter how I was doing it and what I was doing, where my focus was. But that was the result that came from it. But for a few years, yeah, it was rough.
Yeah, that you're right. A traumatic experience is necessary for a spiritual awakening. I don't see any other way around it, honestly. And, similar for me, I would have to say, like, I hate to admit it, but a breakup actually was a catalyst for me to have a spiritual awakening as well. But if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have met like Sarah Ashley is a spiritual content creator in the chat right now. I probably wouldn't have met her because I probably wouldn't have been on that level to be talking with people who think that way. If it wasn't for my like breakdowns, I'd probably still be an atheist right now, like I was in college.
Well, or something else would have had to happen that you would have had to, pay attention to. It's hard to know how life would have been. Um, it is something I've suggested to people to do, is like pretend you turn the clock back 30 years or 25 years or 20 years or something. And how do you think your life would go if you didn't remember the last 20 years? If you were back like 20 years ago when something big happened and oh, my life went this way, but if the life went the other way, well, what do you think your life would have been like if you had gone left instead of right, for example? That's one way. And then the other question would be, what if you went back like 20 years, but you remember everything you've learned? Your whole last 20 years is in your memory. You know everything. Now you're 20 or 25 years ago. How would you live? How much different would you live? How many different choices would you make? What would you do? It's also, I think, a really good indication to give us some understanding of, this is how I would have lived my life. This is what I would have done. This is like probably what would have happened. I think it also gives an indication that tells us more of the truth of of what our character is in the dream, what our character in the movie is. So both of those, I think, are useful experiences as little small exercises to, yeah, drop ourselves back and see, what do we think our life would have been with a different choice, and what do we think we would be doing? I've had lots of questions of myself, like, if I went back 30 years knowing what I know now, like, what would I do? Or if I went back 40 years, would I even go to university? Probably not. I would probably say that that's a waste. That was a waste of my time and a waste of money. There's a whole lot of different things I could have done with that time and that energy and that period of my life than doing that. So it's also interesting to see, with certain knowledge, how different would you live your life? And then it can be fun to play a game. Like, well, then what would have happened from it? What do you feel would have, who would you have met? What kind of experiences would you have had? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it could be important to temporarily self-reflect on things that could have been, because Carlos Castaneda talks about the recapitulation or the life review, and it's important to like make notes and think back of major events in your life. So that way, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you're given the life review after death, potentially, you aren't sucked back here through guilt or any like karma that they might try to throw on you, because you're like, oh, I already
Yeah.
reflected
Well, of
on that.
course, in a Castaneda term, the life review is your complete life. It's every moment you've ever lived. Every experience you've ever had needs to be looked at and redone. Which, when I did mine, I didn't understand why. I just, something indicated to me, okay, I took it like a challenge, and I said, okay, I'm going to do it. I didn't know anybody who had done it. So I said, okay, I'm just going to do it. And it was really dull. It was really boring. I did learn a lot about myself in the process. I did see some things I didn't know. I saw some really crappy things about myself. I saw ways I treated other people that were bad. I saw things that I did that were quite wonderful that I forgot about. But it wasn't until I finished the recapitulation completely that all of a sudden the doors started to open and all the memories I had buried started coming out. and things that I never knew had existed in my life. And I realized this is why you recapitulate. You recapitulate to find the things you don't remember at all. You have to, yeah, you want to work through the things you do remember that are trapping you, but there's all of these things that we have literally locked away or have changed we kind of have the experience, but we changed it so completely that it's nothing like what really happened. And now I see that's a big part of preparing for the after death life review, because it seems like in the after death life review, these beings that are going to run it, they're not doing it for your benefit. They're doing it to find how they can show you what a terrible, awful person you were, throw a ton of guilt and shame on you so that we can have to say, oh, I'm just not good enough. I'm not perfect enough. I have to go back and do this again. Yes, please send me back so I can get more loving and more kind. If we know our life completely and totally, where there's and those things that would, if they could all of a sudden surprise you, oh, by the way, remember this thing that happened when you were at 9? No. Yeah, well, remember this? No, look at this now. Oh, crap. Well, I can see why I've got to go back, but at least there's none of these that are hiding anymore and say, yeah, I remember that now. I look through it. It's something I did a number of years ago. I learned about the experience. I've transformed from it. Next, that it's a really important part of having nothing hiding in our experience. And so in the book, I talk about that people probably don't have time for a complete life review anymore. I don't think people can logically put in 4 to 5 years of their time anymore. That's why I suggested in the book making the recapitulation list, which is just the list of all the people you've known and key experiences with all of them. And that's like a miniature life recapitulation. You're going to get a lot done from that, which I think is very valuable. The other is this album of memories that you've probably read now that you're reading Active Side of Infinity, and which I finally understood about 2 weeks ago. I had my first memory that goes in my album. I had my first event for my album. It's taken me 15 years to figure out what it is. And because he says it's an event that has the dark touch of the impersonal. It's an event that happens to you, but doesn't necessarily only happen to you. It happens to everybody. And 15 years I've been looking for an event that fits that. And it finally it's this event. Boom, here it is. And so either of these two ways I think are valuable because they're a bit time saving rather than doing a whole life recap. But if you really want to try one, go ahead. I know only one other person, and I've known a lot of people in a lot of spiritual traditions, one who's done a complete recapitulation. I know a lot of people who started and they always had a reason to quit. They always had a reason to stop doing it. So, but if you're willing to go through and finish it, one thing I can guarantee, if you actually did do it, if you were able to make it through a complete life recap, the gifts of it are beyond what you could believe. Oh, I've lost your sound. Yeah, no. Do the people in the chat hear him? That's really weird. I've got sound on my end, so I've got I can hear my computer. Well, I guess somehow reality's telling us this might be where we're supposed to end the conversation. Yeah, no sound. Are they hearing? The question is, are you hearing me? That would be the other question, is to make sure that the people in the chat aren't hearing Brett. Are they hearing what I'm speaking?
Can you hear me through the speakers right now?
Oh, now I got you. Now I'm
Okay.
hearing it.
Yeah, that is odd. I think my mic disconnected and now I'm talking to the speakers, so the audio doesn't sound as
Okay.
good.
Okay, that's fine. You have to listen to me. Yeah, well, I guess that's the indication of
Yeah,
this is where we should
right.
end it. So
I think so. But yeah, I think we should do this again sometime because I'm gonna read The Trap and I really want you to watch Severance and let me know what you think. And yeah, even check out Matt's videos on freevoice.io. He talks about Severance, which I know you post there too. I haven't seen you post on that website in a little bit. Are you going to post more?
I don't know. Rob has been making changes, and the changes are supposed to have taken place quite a long time ago. where the site is totally revamped and totally different, and it hasn't happened yet. And I've kind of been waiting for this new site. If the new site happens, then I'll go back. But for now, it's I'm just wait. We've been at least for me, I've been waiting for Rob to make the changes.
Gotcha. Okay. Well,
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. I'm also because I've got on my plate to watch the television show, The Good Place. So I'm going to watch that, but I'll take a peek at Severance and get a little bit of an overview and see what's there.
oh yeah, isn't The Good
And,
Place the one comedy? Right, it's a
yeah,
comedy. Yeah, I've seen bits of it. It is pretty good. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm curious. I got the whole series, so I'm going to watch the whole thing and just see how many reveals are in that. But yeah, there's Severance. A lot of people have been telling me to watch 1899, the Netflix thing that seems all about simulation theory and whatnot. So that could be interesting. But all this stuff, but in the midst of trying to get an audiobook out and study on the next book and do interviews, it's like time is a bit limited, and farm work, and so I have to fit everything in of all this other stuff. So, but yeah, I
Right.
think this has been a great talk, and we should have another one of these and another opportunity. And
Awesome.
yeah,
Yeah,
this is going to
I
be,
agree.
and I hope then, because when I let people know about this talk on my channel, that some people will come over to see this and see your channel and see the stuff you're doing. And so hopefully we can grow some more numbers for you, because I think you're putting out good material, and people should be seeing it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm going to be going on a Legit Bats podcast soon, which I know you were recently on. I've been talking to them, so
Yep.
we'll get the word out there. So thank you, Howdy. This
Sounds
was
great.
awesome.
Yeah, thanks. If anybody's interested and you're looking for me, yeah, you can
Oh
obviously
yeah.
find me over at Howdie
Where can
Mickoski
people
Talk.
find
So
you?
that's no problem. Just zip over there and you can see some of the videos and things on that stuff. I've got the terribly named website, Egyptian-wisdom-revealed.com. And there you can get information on all my books, including Exit the Cave. You can get it either as a PDF file off the website, or it just came out as a print book. It's available on Amazon and a few other places now. And if you want it at different locations, just give it a week and it'll be available. And yeah, so there's different choices. The PDF file is a minimum $5 donation, so that's quite cheap. And the other books are there, and those are good places to start if you're looking to see any more of what I've got to say.
Yeah, and again, Howdy's YouTube is Howdie Mickoski Talks on YouTube. So check him out.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, just follow the name. It's under the thing on his thing here. So just follow the name and you'll get it.
Yeah. Yep. I'll put links in the description. So, all right. Thanks everyone for watching. All right. See you, Howdy.
Cheers. Bye-bye.